Usually when we talk about history, there's this expectation of precision, right? Like it's engineering or something.
Right, yeah. Like a math problem?
Exactly. We think of a timeline, and it looks like this clean, straight ruler. You have the Bronze Age right here, the Iron Age over there, and someone just points at a date and says, well, there it is. That's when everything changed.
Yes, that's when we magically stopped being cavemen.
Right. That's when we started being citizens. We treat time like it's a series of these distinct rooms with heavy doors slamming shut behind us.
Right.
Room A is primitive wanderers. Room B is city builders. It's clean, it's comforting, and it's perfectly categorized.
It is deeply comforting. I mean, we really crave those neat edges in our narratives. But the reality of human prehistory, and specifically our transition into early civilization, is, well, it's the absolute definition of historical muddy waters.
Yeah.
There is no heavy door. There's only this massive, chaotic, incredibly slow-moving transition.
And that transition is our mission for today. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring the ultimate origin story of modern human society for you, the listener. We're looking at the raw mechanics of how our species transitioned from these scattered, wandering hunter-gatherers into city builders, which, sets the stage for absolutely all of recorded history.
It really does. It's the foundation of everything.
And to guide us today, we are drawing heavily from this monumental historical synthesis by James Roberts and Odd Arne Westad. It's called The Penguin History of the World. And honestly, just thinking about the cover of that book sets the tone perfectly for this.
Oh, the Tower of Babel painting.
Yes. It features this classical, incredibly evocative painting of the Tower of Babel. It's this towering, intricate, almost impossible structure with these tiny little figures crawling all over the arches, just trying to reach higher into the clouds. It perfectly symbolizes humanity's chaotic, relentless drive to build, to organize, and just reach for something far beyond mere survival.
It really is the ambition of civilization captured on a single canvas.
Yeah.
And to truly grasp that ambition, we have to start by completely resetting our sense of scale.
How do you mean?
Well, it is incredibly easy to suffer from recency bias. We look out the window at skyscrapers, fiber optic cables, smartphones, and we think, oh, this is the default state of humanity. But human beings have existed for at least 20 times as long as the civilizations we've managed to create.
Wow. 20 times.
Yeah. The overwhelming majority of the human experience on this planet was just spent roaming the wilderness, surviving day to day.
So if you compress human history into like a 24-hour clock, civilization doesn't even show up until a couple of minutes before midnight.
Exactly.
That's wild. So the story we are telling today, the prelude to what we call history with a capital H, it truly only begins as the last ice age starts to wane, right?
Right. That ebbing of the ice, the geological epoch known as the Pleistocene giving way to the Holocene, that is the core environmental trigger. Within a span of about maybe 5,000 to 6,000 years, which, I mean, that's barely a blink in evolutionary time.
Right, a total drop in the bucket.
Exactly, a succession of momentous changes took place.
And scholars have famously grouped those changes under the umbrella term, the Neolithic Revolution. So, chronologically, you have the Paleolithic, which is the Old Stone Age, followed by the Mesolithic, and then this Neolithic phase. But we run into a major semantic trap right out of the gate with that phrase, don't we?
We do, yeah. Because Neolithic strictly, like archaeologically speaking, just refers to a culture in which ground or polished stone tools replaced chipped ones.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because calling a shift in how you make a stone axe a revolution feels like a massive overstatement. I mean, a chipped flint tool is incredibly sharp, right? People were bringing down literal mammoths with chipped stone.
Oh, absolutely. They were lethal.
So why is polishing a rock suddenly the dawn of a new era?
Well, it really comes down to durability and environmental engineering. A chipped flint blade is razor sharp, yes, but it is deeply brittle. If you take a chipped flint axe and strike a massive oak tree with it, the blade is probably going to shatter. You just cannot clear dense forests with flint. But if you take a tough, crystalline rock, something like basalt or diorite, and you spend weeks, literally weeks, grinding it against sandstone with water and sand until it's perfectly smooth and polished, you create an entirely different tool. A polished stone axe absorbs impact. It doesn't shatter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Suddenly, humans possess a tool capable of felling heavy timber, clearing massive tracts of land, and shaping wood for permanent structures. So the polished stone axe is really the prerequisite technology for altering the landscape on a macro scale.
So the tool itself changes the carrying capacity of the environment because it finally allows humans to reshape their surroundings.
Mm.
But even with that incredible technological leap, the word revolution still feels highly misleading
It is.
because it implies a sudden overnight coup. It's like calling the transition from renting a small apartment to owning a home a revolution.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Because on paper, the title of the house changes hands on a specific day.
Mm-hmm.
You get the keys. But the lived reality, that involves years of saving money, slowly accumulating furniture, learning how to fix a leaky sink, figuring out property taxes, and just gradually changing your entire daily routine. It's a slow, grueling evolution of lifestyle. It's not a sudden flip of a switch.
That analogy hits the mark perfectly, really, because it highlights the lived friction of the change. In the archaeological record, there was no sudden flip of a switch. This was an incredibly slow, uneven, and just ragged transformation.
Ragged is a good word for it.
Yeah, in one geographic location, the Neolithic phase might last thousands of years longer than in a neighboring valley. Its beginnings are separated from what went before, not by a clear boundary line, but by this mysterious, murky zone of cultural experimentation. Within this era, not all societies possess the same skills at the same time. Some groups figured out how to fire pottery alongside their polished stone tools. Others went a step further and started to domesticate dogs or, gather wild cereal crops. It's just a slow, messy evolution.
Yet it serves as the crucial matrix from which civilization actually appears. It provided all the preconditions. But I really want to look at the people actually holding those heavy, polished basalt axes for a second. We're talking about these grand shifts in tools and land clearing, but the physical reality of the old Stone Age sounds absolutely brutal. We have to strip away this romanticized modern notion of the noble savage living in perfect balance harmony with a gentle Mother Nature.
Oh, we absolutely do. The physical conditions were deeply unforgiving. At the end of the Upper Paleolithic, anatomically modern humans existed physically, much as we know them today, but their environment extracted a massive toll on their biology.
Yeah.
In the Old Stone Age, reaching the age of 40 was a profound anomaly.
You would be the ultimate elder of your tribe at 40, and you'd probably look and feel like you were 90.
Precisely. Surviving to that age meant accumulating decades of physical trauma. Skeletons from this era show people who were prematurely aged, their joints just completely ruined by osteoarthritis from relentless physical labor and carrying heavy loads. They suffered from rheumatism and the casual everyday accidents of hunting and gathering, broken bones that didn't set right, torn ligaments that never healed, and the dental record is just horrific. Rotting teeth with no dentistry, massive abscesses that could easily lead to a fatal systemic infection.
And this physically demanding environment, and specifically the food they were desperately trying to acquire, actually sculpted their skeletal structure. I mean, humans would go on to change in height and weight as their nutrition improved later on, but there's this one specific detail about the human jaw that completely blew my mind in the text.
Ah, yes.
The Anglo-Saxon overbite. It turns out the literal shape of our mouths today is an artifact of ancient agriculture.
It is, and the jaw shape is such a brilliant illustration of Wolff's Law.
Wolff's Law.
Yeah, it's the medical principle that bone in a healthy person or animal will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. So think about the mechanical forces required to process a hunter-gatherer's diet. It's heavy on tough, fibrous, dried meats, raw tubers, dense vegetation.
You are literally using your teeth as a vice grip to tear meat off a bone.
Exactly. And to process that kind of material, the jaw needs to exert immense force. When you bite down on something incredibly tough, your jaw naturally seeks the most stable, grinding position, which is an edge-to-edge bite.
Right.
The top teeth and the bottom teeth meet flush against each other, like a pair of pliers. To support this massive mechanical demand, the mandible, the jawbone itself, has to grow incredibly robust and thick. For millennia, human populations universally possess this edge-to-edge bite.
But then the diet changes. As agriculture takes hold, human societies shift heavily toward processed grains, starches, and softer carbohydrates. We start eating breads, porridges, and boiled lentils.
And the mechanical stress on the jaw just plummets. Over successive generations of eating soft porridge, instead of tearing through raw antelope muscle, the jawbone simply doesn't need to grow as robustly.
Makes sense.
Without that intense daily grinding force, the upper jaw and lower jaw develop slightly differently. The upper palate tends to narrow slightly, and the lower jaw doesn't extend out as far, resulting in the top teeth resting over the bottom teeth.
Which is the modern overbite.
Exactly. In England, for example, skeletons generally maintain that edge-to-edge bite right up until around AD 1066. After that period, as the medieval diet shifts even further into soft starches, the overbite becomes the standard anatomical norm.
It really makes you wonder how our modern, ultra-processed diet of incredibly soft foods is reshaping our cranial structure right now, entirely under the radar.
It's a fascinating thought, yeah.
But wait, if their bodies were adapting, if their jaws were shifting, and their bones were getting battered by this harsh environment, what about their brains? Were they fundamentally different from us? Like if they were struggling just to survive past their 30s, were their brains somehow less capable?
The archaeological consensus is a very firm no. The physical types of humans differed across continents based on climatic adaptations, skin pigmentation, limb length, fat distribution, but their innate mental capacities were identical to ours. Since the Upper Paleolithic, which is roughly 40,000 years ago, human raw mental hardware has not fundamentally improved.
Wait, really?
No.
So if you took a baby born 40,000 years ago in a freezing cave in Europe and brought them through a time machine to today, they could learn to write Python code, pilot a commercial jet, and understand complex financial derivatives just as easily as anyone born today.
Absolutely. They possess the exact same prefrontal cortex, the same capacity for neural plasticity. Homo sapiens, 40,000 years ago, were already demonstrating staggering versatility. They were adapting their behavioral heritage to survive the massive climatic upheavals of the Ice Age.
Right.
They weren't just surviving, they were engaging in abstract thought. We see the dawn of complex characterization in cave art, which implies a sophisticated understanding of symbolism and likely a highly complex language to communicate those symbols. They had all the rudimentary cognitive elements required for civilization.
Which brings up the ultimate paradox here. They had the exact same raw brain power we do. They had language, they had art, they could organize hunts to take down megafauna. So why did they wait tens of thousands of years to build cities? If they had the cognitive capacity to invent plumbing and architecture, why didn't they just do it?
Because brain power alone cannot build a city. The missing ingredient wasn't biological at all, it was purely economic.
Economic.
Yes, the true catalyst for civilization is the generation of an economic surplus.
Meaning just having more food than you absolutely need to survive until tomorrow.
Exactly. It's the mathematical foundation of everything that follows. For all of human history, up to about 10,000 years ago, humanity relied on a hunting and gathering economy. That system is incredibly resilient, sure, but it rarely allows for a surplus. It was conceivable only in very rare, specially favored microenvironments, like maybe a coastal tribe with an endless supply of salmon.
Right.
But everywhere else, you're living hand to mouth. The true mechanism that broke the ceiling, the engine that made a reliable, scalable surplus possible, was the invention of agriculture.
And the math behind this shift is just mind-bending. If you look at the spatial requirements for survival, a hunting-gathering family requires immense tracts of land. You are relying entirely on the natural carrying capacity of the wild environment. So you need a massive territory to track migrating herds, find seasonal berries, gather nuts, and once you deplete a specific valley, you cannot just sit there and wait for the berries to grow back.
Right, you'd starve.
You have to move. You are a captive to the natural cycle. But primitive agriculture completely rewrites the spatial equation. By intentionally clearing land and cultivating high-yield crops, a family suddenly needs only about 25 acres to survive.
Exactly. From hundreds of square miles to just 25 acres.
That is a compression of space that fundamentally alters human existence.
It really does. Because when you compress the space required for survival, you trigger an explosive acceleration in population density. You can suddenly stack thousands of people in a concentrated area of land, and because the food is tied to the soil, the people become tied to the soil. Settlements take on an unprecedented solidity.
Yeah.
You stop moving. You invest labor into building permanent structures, digging wells, erecting walls. True villages finally materialize.
But, the jump to intentionally planting seeds still feels deeply counterintuitive to me. Gathering wild berries and hunting deer is written into our DNA. We evolved to track and forage. The idea of completely clearing a plot of land, burying perfectly good seeds in the dirt, and then just sitting around for 4 months hoping the weather cooperates so they grow into food, that seems like a massive leap of faith for a starving hunter-gatherer. How did they figure it out? Did some ancient Einstein just wake up and invent farming?
It's a great question, but it's highly unlikely it was a sudden stroke of genius. It was a slow, desperate adaptation driven by population pressure and environmental shifting. As the Ice Age retreated, global moisture patterns changed, and that led to massive afforestation-dense forests grew back over the open tundras.
Oh, so the hunting grounds disappeared.
Yes. In many areas, traditional hunting-gathering grounds became crowded or just less productive for large game. Population pressure essentially trapped groups in certain regions. They were forced to extend the carrying capacity of their immediate living space. Now, they had already spent millennia observing how wild grasses grew and seeded. Agriculture began as an attempt to artificially replicate and concentrate those natural processes just to stave off starvation.
And we can actually see the geographical footprint of this desperate adaptation. We have this incredible archaeological map titled Early Sites of Farming in the Middle East and Europe, and it visualizes this phenomenon perfectly.
It's a fascinating map. When you analyze the spatial data on it, what stands out to you about how this technology moved?
Honestly, it looked exactly like a slow-moving wave rippling outward from a single point of impact. The map uses these little circles to denote early farming sites. The darkest circles, which are the oldest dating to 5200 BC or earlier, are clustered tightly in the Middle East. You see them heavily concentrated along the coast of the Levant, pushing up into Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, and a few creeping toward the Caspian Sea.
Right, that is the initial epicenter, the incubator for this specific strain of agriculture.
Then you have these half-filled circles representing the period from 5200 to 4000 BC, and these form a massive clear band pushing outward from that epicenter. They follow the river valleys deep into Central Europe, spreading across the Mediterranean islands. Finally, the white circles, representing the newest sites from 4000 to 2800 BC, they're pushed all the way out to the extreme, ragged edges of Western Europe, up into the British Isles, across France, and down the coast of North Africa. It literally looks like a pebble was dropped in the Middle East, and the ripples of wheat and barley slowly washed across Europe over the course of 3,000 years.
That concept of a slow-moving wave really captures the mechanism perfectly. It's vital to understand that this was not an invading army conquering territory and forcing people to farm. It was a technological package, a way of life, an idea, a set of seeds and tools, slowly creeping from valley to valley, generation after generation. Nomadic groups encountering settled farmers, realizing the massive caloric advantage of the surplus, and gradually adopting the practices themselves.
But looking at a map of just Europe and the Middle East can give a very warped perspective. It makes it seem like the spark of civilization only ignited in one single place on Earth. And that is a huge misconception.
Oh, it absolutely is. Agriculture didn't just start in the Levant and diffuse to the rest of the planet. Different environments offered completely different opportunities, and human ingenuity is universal. Some groups pursued massive herds across the plains, uncovered by retreating ice, while others focused on exploiting prolific river valleys rich in edible plants and fish.
They adapted to whatever raw materials their specific environment offered them.
Exactly. And when you look at the raw materials, the Old World Eurasia and Africa had a massive, unfair geographical advantage over the Americas. They possessed a significantly higher number of plant and animal species that were naturally predisposed to domestication.
Right, I mean, you can't farm if the local plants are toxic or yield 0 calories.
Exactly. And you can't herd animals that are universally aggressive and solitary. Because of this abundance of domestical species in the Old World, agriculture ignited independently in multiple places, taking on vastly different forms.
One of the most fascinating examples of this independent innovation is in China. The archaeological details here are staggering. Sometime shortly after 9000 BC, in the incredibly fertile Yangtze and Yellow River valleys, populations were cultivating primitive forms of millet and rice. But there's a specific site, Jiahu, located geographically between those two great rivers, that paints a picture so vivid it almost feels like time travel.
Oh, Jiahu is a phenomenal window into early settled life.
Yeah.
What did the excavations there reveal that struck you the most?
It's the complexity of their daily lives. Dating back to at least 7000 BC, archaeologists uncovered 45 distinct house foundations. We are talking about a highly organized, permanent settlement. They found thousands of artifacts, including spades and incredibly specialized reap hooks, proving they had a highly developed, systematic rice cultivation system. But the detail that completely stopped me in my tracks, amidst the farm tools and the pottery, they found a large number of musical instruments, specifically flutes, carved from the wing bones of cranes.
Bone flutes. Capable of playing complex multi-note melodies. It's incredible.
Think about the profound implications of that. It is 7,000 BC. You are living in a permanent mud brick house between two massive rivers. You have harvested a massive yield of rice using a specialized repuk. Your food for the winter is secure in a storage pit. And because you are not desperately wandering a frozen tundra trying to spear a mammoth to survive the week, you have the energetic surplus to hunt a crane. Carefully extract wing bone, hollow it out, calculate the acoustics to drill perfectly spaced holes, and then sit in your village and play music.
It is the ultimate proof of what surplus actually buys humanity. It buys the cultivation of the mind. When farmers transition to settled village life, they dramatically improve their chances of fermenting knowledge.
Fermenting knowledge, I like that.
Yeah.
A nomadic tribe can only carry what fits on their backs. Their knowledge is limited to immediate survival and oral tradition. But a settled village can sustain knowledge across generations. They can tinker, refine, and spread ideas. The surplus of calories translates directly into the most precious resource of all time. Time to observe the stars, time to invent mathematics, time to create art and music that serves no biological survival purpose whatsoever.
The cultivation of the mind. Wow. But while the people of Jiahu were fermenting knowledge through rice and music, a completely different agricultural spark was accelerating in the Middle East, in a region widely known as the Fertile Crescent.
Right, a massive arc of territory running northwards from the Nile Valley in Egypt, up through Palestine and the Levant, curving across Anatolia, and sweeping down into the river valleys of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. And, the name Fertile Crescent always feels deeply ironic to me when you look at a satellite map of that region today. Much of it is arid desert, scrubland, or entirely depleted soil. But we have to imagine it 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. The paleoclimate was fundamentally different. The climate was at its absolute optimum. It was incredibly lush. They had dense fields of wild barley growing naturally in southern Turkey. They had a prolific wild wheat called emmer choking the Jordan Valley. Egypt actually enjoyed enough regular rainfall to support big game hunting on plains that are now totally swallowed by the Sahara.
The environmental baseline was incredibly favored compared to the hostile deserts that encircle it today, for sure. The cereal grasses that form the genetic ancestors of our modern global food supply, wheat, barley, rye, they've all been traced back to these specific lands. We even have archaeological evidence of groups harvesting, though not yet systematically planting wild grasses in Asia Minor as far back as 9500 BC. They were utilizing stone sickles to reap wild fields that stretched to the horizon.
And to drive home how different this environment was, there is a historical fact that sounds like pure fantasy. There were actual wild elephants roaming in the dense forests of Syria as late as 1000 BC.
I know, it's hard to picture.
The idea of a Syrian elephant completely shatters our modern visual framework of the Middle East.
It's a vital reminder that geography and climate are highly dynamic variables. The stage upon which human history is acted out is constantly shifting beneath our feet. And within this incredibly lush, resource-dense region, the geographical layout allowed for relatively easy contact between vastly different groups.
So they weren't farming in isolated bubbles then. The surplus was already driving complex logistics. We have discoveries in southwest Iran of bladed tools made from obsidian, which is a very specific, incredibly sharp volcanic glass. These tools date back to 8000 BC. But chemical analysis shows the obsidian itself came from Anatolia, hundreds of miles away. So even as they were just figuring out the mechanics of planting wheat, early complex trade networks were already spanning mountain ranges.
Which demonstrates the immense dynamism of these early societies. They were hungry for specialized materials. But mastering plants and trading volcanic glass was only half the equation of the agricultural leap. The other half, which had arguably a more profound impact on human daily life, involved taming the wild beasts that shared their ecosystem.
The jump from hunting game to systematically herding it, animal husbandry?
Yes. It represents an incredible psychological shift in the relationship between humans and the natural world. You transition from viewing an animal as an immediate target to viewing it as a long-term biological asset. The first definitive traces of keeping domesticated sheep come from northern Iraq, dating to around 9000 BC.
It is wild to visualize the ancestors of our familiar docile farm animals just roaming free. We are talking about the massive, highly aggressive, wild forebears of the Jersey cow, or the wild-tusked ancestors of the Gloucester Old Spot pig. For hundreds of thousands of years, these animals just grazed on grassy hills or rooted in forests, completely untroubled by humans, except for the occasional hunting party trying to spear one.
And domesticating them was not a gentle process either. You don't just walk up to a wild 1000-pound aurochs and put a rope around its neck.
Definitely not.
The mechanics of early domestication likely involved trapping herds in box canyons or gradually habituating them to human presence by providing salt or fodder during harsh winters. Crucially, it involved selective culling. You immediately kill the most aggressive males, allowing only the most docile, manageable animals to breed. Over generations, you genetically reshape the species to suit your needs. Pigs were abundant all over the Old World, but sheep and goats were especially plentiful in Asia Minor.
And once you successfully corral and breed them, the economic output is staggering. It's not just about having a walking, self-replicating meat supply.
Oh no, the meat is almost secondary. The true revolution of animal husbandry is the cascade of secondary products. Systematic exploitation leads to total control over their breeding and life cycle. The harvesting of skins and the specialized breeding for wool open up entirely new possibilities for clothing, allowing humans to survive in much harsher, colder climates. And then there is the biological marvel of dairying.
The dawn of milk and eventually cheese.
Yes, which
Yeah.
is a profound evolutionary milestone. Human beings, like all mammals, naturally lose the ability to digest lactose after infancy. But in these early herding societies, a genetic mutation allowing for adult lactase persistence provided such a massive caloric advantage that it rapidly swept through the populations. They engineered their environment by domesticating cows and goats, and in response, the animals literally engineered human DNA, allowing us to consume their milk.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. When we corralled these wild sheep, cattle, and pigs, when we started selectively breeding them, milking them every morning, and sharing them, didn't we inherently trap ourselves in the process? Well, a hunter-gatherer has the ultimate freedom of mobility. If the weather turns bad, they can walk 100 miles in any direction.
Yeah.
But a farmer is geographically locked. A shepherd has to stay put to protect the flock from wolves. You can't abandon a field of wheat for 2 months. Did domestication actually domesticate us?
That is a brilliant and entirely accurate perspective. The settled lifestyle enforced a brand new, highly rigid stability, heavily rooted in relentless routine. The importance of routine became the dominant force in human existence. You were entirely tethered to the seasons, the brutal calculus of the harvest cycle, the daily, unavoidable milking schedule.
Right, you cannot take a weekend off from milking a cow. The animal will suffer, the milk production will drop, and your winter surplus vanishes.
Exactly. This routine fundamentally, permanently altered human daily life. It forced new collective disciplines. If a hunter-gatherer gets lazy, maybe they go hungry for a day. If a farmer gets lazy and fails to repair the irrigation ditch, the entire village starves in January.
Wow, high stakes.
Very high. This required a level of social control and collective discipline that had to be accepted for the survival of the community. Socially, humanity was becoming inextricably tethered to the dirt they farmed and the animals they fed.
And this tethered, high-stakes lifestyle completely rewired how humans interacted with one another, leading directly to the birth of true villages and, ultimately, the invention of social hierarchy.
Because once you establish an assured, reliable food surplus, something profound happens to the mathematics of society. In a nomadic hunting tribe, every single able-bodied person is engaged in the acquisition of food. There is no margin for error. But with a surplus of wheat in the storehouse, a society can suddenly afford to tolerate and feed specialists, people who consume calories but do not produce food.
This is the birth of the professional class. The artisan who spends all day perfecting pottery, the priest who tracks the stars to predict the seasons, the full-time toolmaker.
Precisely. And with these specialists driving innovation, settlements could grow rapidly in complexity and scale. Jericho is a prime archaeological example. Before 9000 BC, it was a tiny, insignificant village, perhaps just a small shrine centered around a local spring. But 1,000 years later, fueled by the agricultural surplus, it had exploded into an 8 to 10 acre settlement.
8 to 10 acres, densely packed with mud brick houses, and most shockingly, surrounded by massive, substantial stone walls and a stone tower. To build a stone wall of that magnitude using polished stone tools and pure human muscle is a staggering feat of engineering.
It requires immense coordination, centralized labor, and leadership. You have to feed hundreds of workers who are moving stones instead of farming. But this brings up a profound irony regarding the concept of surplus. We intuitively link the idea of civilization and surplus with leisure time. We assume that because they weren't chasing mammoths, they were relaxing.
Right, but the historical reality is the exact opposite. Yes, the surplus created leisure time for the new specialists, the priests and the scribes. But for the actual farmers working the fields, the physical toll was immense. If you look at the bone density and joint wear of early farmers, it is clear they had significantly less leisure time than their hunter-gatherer ancestors.
It's the paradox of early civilization. The hunter-gatherer works intensely but intermittently. A hunt might be exhausting, but it is followed by days of rest and storytelling. The farmer works constantly. They are driven by the relentless daily demands of weeding, harvesting, threshing, grinding grain, and tending herds.
And they're driven by the demands of the people in the village who expect to be fed. If you are the farmer, you aren't just feeding your family anymore. You are feeding the stonemasons building the wall and the priests praying for rain.
Exactly. This surplus and the intense specialization it allowed naturally necessitated a system of exchange. Barter emerges. People trading a perfectly crafted flint dagger for a sack of barley. Barter eventually evolves into formalized trade networks. But the most consequential byproduct of this dynamic is the multiplication of social distinctions.
Meaning, for the first time in human evolutionary history, humanity was fundamentally divided into distinct classes based on societal role and accumulated wealth.
Yeah. In a small nomadic band, there might be a charismatic leader or a respected elder, but wealth is strictly limited to what you can physically carry on your back. Everyone is essentially equal in their poverty. But in a settled village, wealth can be accumulated, hoarded, and passed down. You can have a storehouse full of grain, beautiful pottery, and imported obsidian tools. Social hierarchies become rigid. You have the wealthy, the specialists, the farmers, and soon the laborers.
But where there is accumulated wealth, where a village has spent all summer filling a stone silo with grain, there is suddenly something incredibly tempting worth stealing. If I am a starving nomad, why would I spend months farming when I can just walk over and take your silo?
Which brings us to the inevitable dark side of the agricultural surplus. It encouraged humanity's oldest organized activity after hunting, warfare.
It is a brutal progression. The mere existence of human and material prizes, grain, polished weapons, domesticated animals made organized raids incredibly lucrative.
And this creates an ancient, bloody tension that defined early history for centuries, the conflict between the nomads and the settlers. Settlements desperately needed organized protection from human predators. If you invest a year of backbreaking labor into growing a field of wheat, you cannot afford to have a roaming band of pastoralists sweep in and harvest it with swords.
Right.
This desperate need for protection is likely what gave birth to the concept of centralized political power. You need a warlord or a king to organize the defense, conscript the laborers to build the walls, and command the guards.
I want to zero in on a stunning, almost terrifying historical theory regarding this dynamic from the text. The idea that the very roots of aristocracy, the entire concept of a ruling noble class that sits above the common peasantry, might have originated with wild hunter-gatherers realizing a terrifying loophole in the farming system.
Right, the protection racket theory.
Yes, like instead of just raiding the village, burning it down, and stealing the grain once, what if a band of heavily armed nomads realized the farmers were permanently tethered to their land? The farmers can't run away, because if they leave their fields, they starve. So the hunters just stay. They use their monopoly on violence to subjugate the village, declaring themselves the permanent lords and demanding a cut of the harvest every single year.
It is a dark, highly plausible mechanical theory for the origins of social stratification. The older, more mobile, deeply martial social order of the hunter-gatherers exploiting the inherent vulnerability of the settlers. The farmers are trapped by their own massive sunk cost investments in the soil and the infrastructure.
They literally cannot pack up their 25 acres and run into the woods.
Exactly. So the martial nomads essentially run a permanent protection racket. They extract the agricultural surplus as a form of tribute or taxation. Over generations, the conquerors institutionalize their power, becoming the entrenched aristocracy. The conquered farmers become the hereditary peasantry.
It makes horrific sense mechanically.
Yeah.
Why hunt deer when you can hunt farmers? But I also want to push back on this a little because it paints a picture of instant, global, Mad Max-style warfare the second a seed was planted. But it wasn't all immediate brutality everywhere, was it?
No, and it is crucial to maintain a balanced perspective on the timeline. Early on, the world was still remarkably empty. In places like Europe, on the eve of the introduction of farming, there was ample space and incredibly thin populations. The spread of farming, that slow-moving wave we discussed earlier, often lacked any archaeological evidence of violent struggle initially.
Because there was simply enough room for everyone. If a valley got too crowded, a splinter group could just walk a few miles over the ridge and clear a new patch of untouched forest.
Precisely. It was only slowly, as populations expanded exponentially due to the surplus, that the carrying capacity of the best land was reached. Once the prime river valleys were full and pressure on the resources increased, competition for arable land became a zero-sum game, and violent struggle became inevitable.
And if you're going to defend your massive stone walls against organized raiders, or if you need to clear harder, denser forests to feed an exploding population, polished stone axes are no longer going to cut it. You need something fundamentally stronger, sharper, and more durable. Which leads us to the next massive threshold in our human origin story, the slow burn of metallurgy.
In the long run, mastering metal changed the trajectory of the human species just as much as mastering plants.
But there is a massive historical misconception here. We assume that the second someone smelted metal, it instantly replaced stone. We think of it like the invention of the smartphone replacing the flip phone overnight. But in the short term, metallurgy made a surprisingly slow impact. Why did it take so long to catch on? If you discover metal, why are you still using a rock?
The limiting factor was pure logistics and supply chain mechanics. The deposits of metal ore first discovered by early humans were incredibly few, widely scattered, and difficult to access. For thousands of years, there was simply not enough raw metal in circulation to outfit an entire society. It wasn't like wood or flint, which you could find practically anywhere.
The timeline of this slow burn is fascinating.
Yeah.
What was the first metal they actually figured out how to use?
The first metal we have definitive evidence of is copper, which, as a side note, severely weakens the attractiveness of the traditional term Bronze Age for the beginning of metal-using cultures, since a massive Copper Age came first.
The Chalcolithic period.
Yes. Sometime between 7,000 and 6,000 BC, at an incredibly advanced site called Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, we find evidence of copper being hammered into shape cold, and then eventually the true breakthrough, smelting, extracting the pure metal from the ore using intense heat.
7,000 BC. That is staggeringly early. But the mechanics of smelting are incredibly complex. You can't just throw a green rock into a campfire and get liquid copper. A campfire maxes out around 600 degrees Celsius. Copper doesn't melt until nearly 1100 degrees Celsius.
Which is why the mastery of pottery was the prerequisite for metallurgy. You need the technology of the enclosed, draft-fed pottery kiln to reach those extreme temperatures. But even once they figured out the chemistry of smelting in Anatolia, the spread was glacial. The earliest known metal artifacts we have found in Egypt date from about 4000 BC, and they are just tiny, beaten copper pins.
Wow.
It took 3,000 years just to go from smelting copper in Turkey to making copper hairpins in Egypt.
And beyond the scarcity, copper has a massive mechanical flaw as a primary tool, right? It is fundamentally soft. You can make a beautiful copper dagger, but if you hit a bone, the blade bends. It will not hold a sharp edge under stress.
Exactly. A polished stone axe was still vastly superior for chopping wood than a pure copper one. That is why the discovery of bronze was so violently pivotal. Bronze is a metallurgical alloy, a specific blend of roughly 90% copper and 10% tin. Once that specific chemical ratio was discovered, humanity possessed a super material. Bronze is relatively easy to cast into complex molds, but it is incredibly hard and retains a lethal cutting edge. Bronze tools and weapons were in widespread use in Mesopotamia soon after 3000 BC.
But inventing bronze creates a massive new logistical nightmare, doesn't it? Because while copper is somewhat rare, tin is ridiculously scarce.
Tin is the bottleneck of the ancient world. You do not find copper and tin in the same geological locations. To make bronze, you have to bring these two elements together from vastly different regions. This absolute necessity completely rewired early economies.
It essentially created the first globalized supply chains.
It did. It gave a massive adrenaline injection to trade, to the establishment of permanent markets, and to the carving of deep, secure trade routes connecting distant civilizations. People would orchestrate the movement of tons of rock across thousands of miles using pack animals and riverboats just to secure tin from places as far away as modern-day Afghanistan or Cornwall in Britain, dragging it all the way to Mesopotamia to forge weapons.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But even bronze isn't the final boss of ancient metallurgy. Eventually, humanity cracks the code of iron. Now, obviously, iron revolutionized warfare. Iron swords don't shatter like bronze can, and iron armor changes the battlefield. But the historical texts argue that the military application of iron was actually secondary to its impact on something much more basic: farming.
This is a crucial, often overlooked point. We fixate on the swords, but the agricultural applications of iron literally changed the carrying capacity of the earth. A Neolithic farmer, despite his polished stone adze, could only scratch at the surface of the soil. You cannot dig deep into heavy, clay-rich, dense soils with a deer antler or a wooden pick. They shatter.
So you are restricted to farming only the easiest, lightest, sandiest soils along the riverbanks.
Exactly. The vast majority of the landscape is essentially locked away from you. But with iron tools, you could hack away dense, ancient woodlands and scrub brush with ease. And then, around 3000 BC in the Middle East, comes the ultimate game changer, the invention of the plow.
A piece of technology that changed the planet more than the microchip.
Oh, absolutely. When you combine the mechanical leverage of the plow, the immense biological muscle power of a domesticated ox pulling it, and the sheer, unbreakable durability of an iron plowshare biting into the earth, you cross a massive threshold. Humans can finally turn over and dig deep into heavy, nutrient-rich soils.
And digging deep is mechanically vital, right? It breaks up the hard pan, aerates the soil, and brings deep subsoil nutrients up to the root level of the crops. This creates a massive extension of arable, food-producing soil. Millions of acres of heavy European forest land that was previously completely useless for farming suddenly became highly fertile real estate.
It allowed human populations to explode into entirely new environments, pushing the slow-moving wave of civilization into colder, harsher climates.
Okay, let's take a macro look at the stage we have set here. We have the staggering caloric engine of the food surplus. We have the domesticated animals providing muscle and milk. We have the concentrated, highly organized cities protected by walls. We have the specialized artisans, the deep social hierarchies, the sprawling trade routes, and the iron tools conquering the earth. The stage of civilization is fully built, the lights are on. But as we look globally at the timeline of humanity, the curtain doesn't rise for everyone at the exact same moment.
This is perhaps the most humbling and complex part of our deep dive, the ragged edge of history.
Human prehistory does not end with a clean, cinematic cut. There is no single dividing line, no global memo where the whole world wakes up on January 1st, 3000 BC and says, "Welcome to history, everyone, grab an iron plow."
Because different geographical environments, varying access to domestical species, and random historical accidents led to wildly divergent timelines across the globe. The historical record is full of chronological overlaps that completely break our linear sense of time.
The examples of this are just wild. Let's look at the Ainu of northern Japan.
A perfect example. It is only within the last century or so that the traditional Ainu culture largely disappeared as a distinct prehistoric lifestyle. Right up into the modern era, they were living a hunting, gathering, and fishing lifestyle that anthropologists note was remarkably similar to how their ancestors lived 15,000 years ago.
15,000 years of biological and cultural continuity.
Yeah.
While Rome rose and brutally collapsed, while the pyramids were painstakingly stacked, while the Renaissance happened, they just kept successfully, perfectly executing their traditional lifestyle in the forests of Japan.
And they are far from the only ones. When English and French explorers first arrived on the shores of North America in the 16th century AD, they encountered complex, thriving hunter-gatherer and early agricultural societies living much as the explorers' own European ancestors had lived 10,000 years earlier.
And then there's the Maya. We have this terrible habit of lumping all ancient civilizations together into one bucket. But Plato and Aristotle, the foundational thinkers of Western philosophy, lived, wrote their masterpieces, and died long, long before the great Maya civilization of the Yucatan Peninsula even began to rise. The Maya were building their most spectacular pyramids, while classical Greece was already considered ancient history to the Romans.
And true prehistory, a total reliance on stone tools and hunting-gathering, lasted for groups like the Inuit in the Arctic or the Aboriginal peoples of Australia well into the 19th century.
So we have to ask the ultimate so what question here. If we have anatomically modern humans successfully living like it's 10,000 BC in the 19th century, while other humans are across the ocean building steam engines and telegraphs, what is the core takeaway about the mechanics of human progress?
We have to return to the core thesis of our biology. Genetically, the Aboriginal Australian, the 19th century London banker, and the Paleolithic mammoth hunter are the exact same creature. We have not fundamentally evolved new, superior brains in the last 40,000 years. So how do we account for the blinding, rapid acceleration of the last 5,000 years in some specific parts of the world, and the staggering complexity of modern life?
If it's not better neural hardware, what is the software?
The software is the fact that human achievements are cumulative. Historians use a brilliant financial metaphor. We operate on the compound interest of inherited culture and technology.
Compound interest. Okay, so a hunter-gatherer spends a lifetime perfecting a better way to chip a spear point. That's the principal investment. But a farmer in a settled village invents an iron plow, which creates a massive surplus of food, which allows someone else in the village the free time to invent a wheel, which allows a nearby carpenter to invent a cart, which requires a king to organize labor to build a paved road.
Exactly. The feedback loop tightens and accelerates. Primitive societies had far less inherited advantage in their cultural bank account. That makes the magnitude of their first steps, figuring out how to plant wheat, having the courage to domesticate a wild wolf into a dog, discovering how to smelt copper, all the more amazing. They were generating the initial capital from zero.
Right.
But once that foundation was laid, civilization brought conscious attempts on a massive new scale to control and organize the environment. It builds on cumulative mental resources, and the technological feedback loop accelerates the process of change exponentially.
We have more people sharing more complex ideas, standing on a towering mountain of shoulders, the people who came before them. But for all this technological mastery, our historical sources end on a deeply philosophical, almost cautionary note. They point out a fundamental, inescapable human paradox, a dualism at the heart of our species.
Yes, we are, as the authors define us, man, the changemaker. We possess a unique capacity for conscious adaptation, undertaking an unprecedented kind of cultural evolution. We can literally reshape the surface of the earth, divert rivers, split the atom, and cure genetic diseases. We are gods of our environment.
Right.
But we are simultaneously bound by the irrationalities, the hardwired instincts, and the deep emotional shaping of our evolutionary past. Our genetic inheritance not only enables us to make conscious change, it also rigidly controls and limits us.
The text points to the brutal industrialized conflicts of the 20th century as the ultimate proof of this terrifying dualism. We have a technology of gods, but we still possess the volatile emotions and tribal instincts of Ice Age hunter-gatherers.
Precisely. We are masters of our environment in ways our ancestors shivering in caves could never dream of, yet we are still profoundly unfree. We are captive to the blind forces of human nature, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of brutal evolutionary selection. Our aesthetic life, our effective emotional life, the fierce tribalism that drives our modern politics, our fear of the other, it is all rooted deep in that prehistoric past.
So, we are man the changemaker, dragging the heavy, irrational, emotional baggage of the Pleistocene Ice Age with us as we try to navigate the future.
It is a dualism we must learn to recognize and manage. Most great philosophies, major world religions, and enduring mythologies have fundamentally been attempts to deal with this exact agonizing tension between our godlike minds and our animal instincts.
What a monumental perspective-shifting journey this has been today. From the scattered wandering bands of the Ice Age, suffering from rotting teeth and arthritis, to the slow-moving, world-altering wave of agriculture that reshaped the very bones of our jaws and the structure of our societies. From the early, haunting crane-bone music played in Jiahu to the explosive compound interest of culture and metal that builds our modern industrialized world, I want to thank you for guiding us through these murky historical waters today and unpacking the raw mechanics of how we got here.
It has been an absolute pleasure. It is an origin story that fundamentally reorients how you see every single piece of modern infrastructure around you.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to chew on. We started this deep dive by talking about how history is murky, how there are no clean lines on the ruler of time. We look back at the monumental shift from polished stone tools to agriculture and cities, and historians have to group it into this neat retroactive era, even though we now know it was really just a ragged, uneven, slow-moving wave that took thousands of years of messy experimentation. Well, zoom out and think about the exact moment in time we are living in right now. Think about the massive digital, genetic, and artificial intelligence explosion happening all around us. The way our tools are once again completely reshaping our environment and our daily routines. What if what we are experiencing right now is just the beginning of another slow-moving wave? Thousands of years from now, future historians might look back at the 21st century, not as the pinnacle of modern history, but merely as the ragged, untidy end of a second prehistory. The chaotic, messy transition period before a completely new type of post-biological, multi-planetary civilization truly begins. Just like the hunter-gatherers gazing at the first fields of planted wheat, we might have absolutely no idea what kind of world we are actually planting the seeds for. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep challenging your assumptions, and always look at the world with fresh eyes.